When a video of a boy in meltdown went viral, splitting opinions between outraged parents and passionate advocates, no one imagined that the incident would become the catalyst for a fight for understanding and empathy. To me, it wasn't just a news story or a debate. It was about Liam, my younger brother, a brilliant but misunderstood boy. This is a story about myths, truths, and the transformative power of seeing beyond appearances. When I received the call from Mr. Miller, I knew something was wrong. He rarely contacted me directly, so the serious tone in his voice made my heart sink. "Emily, can we talk in person? It's about Liam." Liam, my younger brother, was 12 and the kind of boy you would never forget, for better or worse. He saw the world in a way few could understand, with a passion for astronomy that rivaled that of professional astronomers. But the world wasn't so kind to boys like him. When I entered the school's meeting room, Mr. Miller was there, accompanied by 2 teachers with tense expressions. "Your brother had an episode today," he began, gesturing for me to sit down. "It happened during science class. He lost control." "Lost control?" I repeated, trying to understand. "He was presenting an experiment when the environment seemed to overwhelm him. There were noises, laughter. He started screaming and covering his ears. One of the students filmed everything and posted it on social media. It's already circulating." My stomach churned. "Did you allow this to be posted?" "We didn't allow it, Emily," the principal said with a sigh. "But we can't stop it. The students have phones, and things slip out of our control." That night, when I got home, I watched the video. The camera shook as it captured Liam, standing at the front of the room, holding a small rocket model. He was talking about propulsion when he started to hesitate. In the background, there were laughs and whispers. Someone knocked something over, and the noise echoed. It was enough to trigger his reaction. He covered his ears, shouting, as the room descended into chaos. The comments on the video were worse than the footage. "Weirdo. Is he crazy? Why is he in a regular school?" That night, while he slept, I sat next to his bed, watching him. He looked so calm, so innocent, but I knew this would affect him. It wasn't just about the incident. It was about a system that failed him repeatedly. That's when I made my decision. I couldn't change the whole world, but I could fight for the small piece of it that touched our lives. My first stop was Dr. Marcus Reed's office, a psychologist specializing in autism who had helped us in the past. His office was filled with books on child development and whiteboards scribbled with diagrams. "Emily," he said, waving me in, "what can I do for you?" I explained the incident at school, showed him the video, and mentioned the cruel comments. He listened in silence, adjusting his thick-framed glasses and nodding occasionally. "This is more common than you think," he finally said. "The problem is that people see autism through a filter full of myths. They think they know what it is, but they're actually completely misinformed." "And how do I change that?" I asked. "Education," he replied plainly. "You need to teach people. Show them that Liam isn't just that boy with autism. Show them who he really is." When I went back to school to propose some changes, a more welcoming environment for Liam and adjustments to avoid sensory overload, I was met with skepticism. "Emily," Mr. Miller began, with the patience of someone who had heard many requests before, "I understand your concern, but we have other students to consider. We can't adjust the whole system for one child." "I'm not asking for that," I retorted, trying to hold back my frustration. "I'm asking for small changes that would benefit not only Liam but other students who might also be struggling." He didn't seem convinced. "I'll take it to the administration, but I can't promise anything." Back at Dr. Reed's office, I shared my frustration. He encouraged me to think bigger. "Why not hold a community workshop?" he suggested. "A workshop?" I repeated. "Yeah. Invite parents, teachers, anyone willing to learn. Show them that autism is more than just labels." The idea seemed daunting but also necessary. That night, as I discussed the plan with Liam, he looked at me with his direct gaze. "Why do you care so much, Emily?" I swallowed, surprised by the question. "Because I want people to see what I see in you, Liam. I want them to know how incredible you are. He didn't respond but went back to his solar system model with a small smile. The seed was planted. Liam had a special ability to turn the ordinary into the extraordinary, and his room was proof of that. He had recreated a true home observatory. The walls were covered with drawings of constellations, rocket models, and a moon-shaped lamp cast a soft light across the space. Emily, did you know that the light from the stars we see is already thousands of years old? It's like looking into the past, he commented while adjusting a simple telescope he had received for his birthday. It's amazing, Liam, I replied, fascinated by the passion with which he spoke. His room was a sanctuary, the only place where he seemed completely at ease. Out there, the world judged him for his quirks, but here, he reigned with his own logic and beauty. That afternoon, I sat beside him as he explained how he had aligned the stars on the ceiling according to the real constellations. This one is Vega, he said, pointing to a glowing star. One of the brightest in the night sky. Liam's enthusiasm was contagious, but at the same time, a part of me ached. I knew that few saw what I saw, his genius, his boundless curiosity, his unique view of the world. To most, he was just that weird boy who couldn't handle class. Liam, you really like talking about stars, don't you? I asked, trying to introduce the idea of the workshop in a way he would accept. He looked at me, furrowing his brow. I do, but will they want to listen? They need to listen, I answered firmly. If you tell them about the stars, maybe they'll see the world the way you do. He thought for a moment but then shrugged, which from him was almost a yes. Organizing the workshop was more complicated than I had imagined. I started with a list of people to invite: parents, teachers, community members. Sarah James, my colleague at school, was one of the first to hear my idea. A workshop? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Emily, people can't even commit to going to a parent-teacher meeting. What makes you think they'll show up for this? Because they need to, I replied, undeterred by her skepticism. Look, I support the idea, but you're trying to change the minds of people who don't even know they need to change, she said, sincere but harsh. Despite her words, I pressed on. With Dr. Reed's help, I crafted a simple program. An introduction to demystify autism, real stories to humanize the experience, and the highlight, Liam's presentation on astronomy. However, convincing people to participate was another battle. Some parents seemed interested, but many others were openly opposed. Anonymous comments started appearing on local forums and Facebook groups. Why focus on a minority? This is just another attempt to push inclusion. These comments hit me hard, but I refused to give up. I called Maria Thompson, the mother of Caleb, a 10-year-old boy who was also on the spectrum. Maria, I'm organizing a workshop on autism, and I thought you might come, I explained. She sighed on the other end of the line. Emily, it's a great idea, but I don't know. Every time I try to talk about Caleb, people just change the subject. They don't want to listen. That's exactly why we need to do this, I argued. The next day, I asked Mr. Miller for permission to use the school auditorium. He listened to my explanation, but his face remained expressionless. Emily, he began with that rehearsed tone, I admire your effort, but we can't allow the school to get involved in something so polarizing. Polarizing, I repeated, outraged. It's education, Mr. Miller. It shouldn't be polarizing. He shook his head. I'm sorry, but the answer is no. With no other choice, I rented the community library for the event. Every detail seemed like a struggle. Even Liam, who had initially agreed to participate, started to hesitate. What if they don't like me? He asked while aligning his stars on the ceiling of his room. It's not about liking you, Liam, I replied, kneeling beside him. It's about teaching, and you're the best person to show them how amazing the world can be. He didn't respond, but the way he continued working on his solar system model gave me hope that he would say yes in the end. Despite all the obstacles, the idea of the workshop was taking shape, even though the road ahead still seemed filled with uncertainty. Days before the workshop, I decided to visit some families who were also facing challenges similar to Liam's. I needed to understand their stories, their struggles, and, perhaps, convince them to participate. My first stop was the Thompson house, a family I had known for years. Maria, Caleb's mother, opened the door with a tired smile. Her look, although warm, carried something I recognized immediately: exhaustion. "Emily, it's good to see you. Come in," she said, gesturing for me to sit in the living room. Caleb was in the corner, focused on a complicated puzzle. I told her about the workshop, detailing the plan and explaining how I wanted to use real stories to show what it meant to live on the spectrum. Maria listened attentively, but when I finished, she shook her head. "Emily, I love the idea, but we've tried talking before. People don't listen, or they pretend to understand, but deep down, they don't want to change. And that's why we need to try again," I insisted. "Maria, you saw the video of Liam. This is happening right now with our children. If we don't do something, who will?" She hesitated. "Caleb doesn't like crowds. He wouldn't feel comfortable. And he doesn't have to present. We just need them to be there. The more people present, the harder it will be to ignore." She sighed deeply and gave a small nod. "I'll think about it." Other visits followed a similar pattern. Parents like Maria were used to rejection, closed doors, and the weight of fighting alone. Many seemed hesitant, while others were simply pessimistic. When I got home that night, Liam was in his room, studying diagrams of nebulae. "Do you think it's worth it?" I asked, sitting beside him. He looked at me, surprised by the question. "Don't you think so?" The simplicity of his answer was enough to renew my determination. At school, opposition to the workshop was growing. A group of parents sent an open letter to Principal Miller, demanding the school distance itself from the event. On the community's online forums, the criticism was harsh. "Why focus on something as insignificant as autism? We don't need lectures to teach our kids how to be normal." These comments were like knives, but I kept going. One afternoon, at the end of another meeting, I approached Mr. Miller in the hallway. He seemed tense, and the tired expression on his face made me hesitate for a moment. "Mr. Miller, why are you so against what I'm trying to do?" He was silent for a long moment before gesturing for me to follow him into his office. "Emily," he began, closing the door behind us. "You know I've been fighting against this, but it's not because I don't care. It's because I've seen this before." "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. He sighed deeply, his shoulders relaxing as though relieving an old burden. "My son, David, was diagnosed with autism over 20 years ago, and back then the system was even worse. He suffered, Emily. He was rejected, humiliated, and nothing I tried changed things." My heart tightened as he continued. "I fought like you're fighting now. I knocked on doors, spoke at meetings, tried to educate people. But in the end, it seemed like the more I tried, the harder it got for David. And that's a reason to give up now?" I asked, keeping my voice firm. "If you've been through this, you know better than anyone why we need to keep going." He didn't respond immediately. He stared at the desk for a long time before saying, "I can't promise that I'll support it, but I won't stop you." That night, I returned home feeling a mix of frustration and hope. Mr. Miller wasn't my enemy. He was a man broken by a system that had failed him and his son. I told Liam about the conversation, omitting the heavier details. He looked at me with his direct gaze. "If you don't stop, they won't either." The simplicity of his words gave me the strength to continue. The day of the workshop arrived, filled with anxiety. The community library was set up. Chairs in rows, a small makeshift stage, and a screen for presentations. My heart raced as I watched the clock. The first guests began to arrive, but the space was far from full. Maria arrived with Caleb, who immediately retreated to a corner with a book. Other parents appeared, but mostly they were the ones already familiar with the struggle. Few teachers showed up, and no school administration members, except for Sarah, who walked in with an apologetic smile. "Sorry I didn't help earlier, Emily, but I'm here now," she said, handing me a stack of flyers she'd made at the last minute. I smiled, relieved to at least have an unexpected ally. Dr. Marcus Reed began with his introduction. He debunked myths with precision, using clear examples and real stories. People paid attention, but it was hard to ignore the emptiness in the room. It was like something was missing. Someone who truly needed to hear those words. It was my turn. I took a deep breath and walked up to the stage. "I want to start by telling you about my brother, Liam," I said, projecting a picture of him in his room, surrounded by drawn constellations. I explained how he saw the world in a unique way, how he could identify stars with a precision that amazed me. I talked about the incident at school and how he was misunderstood. Liam isn't a problem to be solved. He's a child full of potential, just like any other, but he needs support to thrive. There was a moment of silence before I called Liam to the stage. He hesitated, but I held his hand, whispering, "You can do this." When he started talking about stars, constellations, and galaxies, something magical happened. The passion in his voice seemed to fill the empty space of the library. Even those who seemed indifferent started to lean forward, paying attention. "Did you know that Vega is 25 light-years away?" he asked, with a sparkle in his eyes. "That means we're looking into the past every time we see it." When he finished, there was a brief silence before the applause began. Maria looked at me, moved, while Caleb even lifted his eyes from his book to listen. But the most unexpected moment came when a man at the back of the room approached. He seemed somewhat out of place but determined. "I'm a journalist," he said, extending his hand. "Can I tell this story? I think more people need to hear it." 2 days after the workshop, Liam's story was published in the local newspaper. The article wasn't just a report on the event, but a powerful narrative about how children on the autism spectrum face daily challenges and how small changes can transform their lives. The headline was striking, "Liam's Universe, a new perspective on autism." The effect was immediate. Comments started pouring in, this time with a completely different tone. People shared the article on social media, often with messages of support and empathy. Some even admitted they had misunderstood the viral video and now saw Liam in a whole new light. At school, changes began slowly. The first major step was the approval of a pilot inclusion program. Mr. Miller, true to his word, presented the proposal to the administration and got enough support to start small adjustments. Basic training for teachers, sensory spaces, and environmental changes to prevent overload. Sarah, who had initially seemed skeptical, became one of the program's most passionate advocates. "I can't believe it took me so long to understand," she said one afternoon as we discussed plans for a student-led inclusion club. "Everyone has their own time," I replied. "The important thing is that you're here now." The biggest impact, however, was on Liam. He began to feel more accepted at school. One day, while we were having breakfast, he casually mentioned, "I made a friend." My fork froze in midair. "Who?" "A boy in my class. He asked about the stars, and I explained." I smiled, holding back tears. It was a small step, but it felt like a giant leap for him. As the inclusion program gained momentum, I was invited to speak at a school board meeting. The room was full, and this time people were really listening. "These changes aren't just for children on the spectrum," I said, looking at the attentive faces in front of me. "They benefit all of us because they create empathy, understanding, and prepare us for a more diverse world." The applause that followed was not shy. It was genuine, and for the first time, I felt we were truly making progress. That night, as we walked home, Liam looked up at the sky and pointed to Vega. "It's always there, even when we can't see it," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Just like you, Liam," I replied, "always shining." A week after the success of the workshop, I received an unexpected message. An invitation to present the inclusion program at a special meeting with the school board and the local community. I knew this would be the opportunity to solidify the changes we had begun, but it would also be a battleground, as critics had not disappeared. The meeting was held in the school auditorium, with more than 50 people present. The atmosphere was tense. On one side were parents advocating for the pilot program and teachers who were beginning to see the benefits. On the other were those who still felt the changes were unnecessary or unfavorable to the majority of students. When I stepped onto the stage, I felt the eyes fixed on me. I took a deep breath, holding my notes. But as I began, I let the words flow naturally. Good evening. I'm here as Liam's sister, a boy on the autism spectrum, but also as a teacher and a member of this community. I want to share what I've learned over the past few months. I projected an image of Liam smiling next to his telescope. This is my brother. He's brilliant, passionate about astronomy, and has a mind that sees the world in a unique way. But for a long time, he was only seen for his challenges, not his abilities. I presented data from the pilot program: fewer emotional breakdowns, increased student engagement, and a noticeable change in the school environment. I also shared success stories, like Caleb's, who is now actively participating in group activities thanks to the adjustments made. But, as expected, the tough questions came. Why should we invest more resources for a minority? Asked a man from the back of the room. Doesn't this harm the majority of students? I moved closer to the microphone. Because creating an inclusive environment benefits everyone. It teaches empathy, prepares our children for a diverse world, and gives them tools to become better people. The debate continued, but was interrupted when Mr. Miller, who had remained silent until then, asked to speak. I'd like to share something personal, he began. My son, David, is on the autism spectrum. For years, I've seen how the system has failed him. And I know that part of me gave up fighting because I believed it was impossible to change. He paused, looking at the audience. But what Emily and Liam have shown is that change is possible, and it's necessary. It's not just for them. It's for all of us. His words had a visible impact. There was a near reverent silence in the room. Finally, I called Liam to the stage. He looked nervous, but his determination won out. I'm not like everyone else, he began, his voice trembling but firm. But that doesn't mean I can't learn or help others learn. The stars are always there, even if you can't see them. Sometimes you just need a telescope. The applause started slowly, but soon filled the room. For the first time, I felt like we weren't just being heard, but understood. After the meeting, the board officially approved the expansion of the inclusion program. It was a moment of victory, but also the start of a new phase. There was still much work to be done. More training, more adjustments, and, above all, more conversations to ensure everyone involved was aligned. At school, the atmosphere began to change. Teachers who had once been resistant started asking how they could help. Students who had previously mocked now showed curiosity and openness. Sarah officially launched the Inclusion Club, and Liam was one of the first to participate. He began helping other students understand more about astronomy, using it as a bridge to build connections. One day, while preparing dinner, I heard laughter from the living room. I peeked through the door and saw Liam surrounded by 3 classmates, explaining how to build a constellation model. It was something I never imagined seeing a few months ago. Emily, he said later that night with a shy smile, they really listened. Of course they listened, I replied, holding back tears. You're brilliant. Meanwhile, the impact of the workshop spread beyond the school. I received an invitation to speak at a state conference on inclusive education. During my presentation, I shared Liam's story and how small changes can have a huge impact. That night, when I returned home, I found Liam in the backyard, looking at the sky with his telescope. Vega is shining tonight, he said, without taking his eyes off the stars. It's always there, I replied, sitting beside him. Just like you. I hugged him, feeling a peace I hadn't experienced in a long time. We hadn't changed the whole world, but we had changed enough for Liam to thrive. And for me, that was more than enough.